Admiral Mark Rich, one of our members, will be introducing Admiral Rich Taylor of the Coast Guard. Mark.
Thank you, President Paul. It is my real pleasure to be here today and let everybody join me in meeting Admiral Keith Taylor, the commander of the 13th District of the United States Coast Guard. I was fortunate enough to meet Keith early on when I got into town last year. He was one of the people, along with several of you in this room, who really took me under their wing and introduced me to the area, introduced me to being a flag officer, and really brought me along and did a tremendous amount of things for me. You'll notice that Keith is wearing wings of gold. He is a naval aviator by training, just like all naval aviators. You know, the Coast Guard goes through the same training that we do to earn his wings of gold that I'm wearing, that Lieutenant Stockton is wearing. In previous jobs, if we were in our flight suits and I met you under professional circumstances, it would have been a bad day for me as a fighter pilot, and you as a helicopter doing SAR. The Coast Guard, everybody knows, does protection well, does life-saving well. I got an introduction into that in another sort of way. Our own Ralph Monroe set up something down in Olympia every year, or sets up something down in Olympia every year called Sea Services Day, where the senior leaders of the Coast Guard and the Navy are introduced on the floor. We get a chance to speak to both floors, speak to the caucuses, and make a couple of office calls. And the first office call we had that day was with a state senator who happened to be on the Transportation Committee. And, you know, we'd barely finished shaking hands and sitting down and making the introductions when he looked right at Keith and said, so, tell me about, you know, why the Coast Guard changed their answer on safety requirements for ferries right after we submitted the budget, and now we've got several $1 million shortfall. You know, that wasn't really what happened, but nevertheless. But that was the first question. The second question was, you know, the never controversial Columbia Bridge, second crossing bridge. So at that point in time, I was thinking about the fourth law of thermodynamics is good. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's when the heat's on somebody else, it's not on you. So I was very grateful for the Coast Guard Protective Services that day, and happy to be in a navy blue uniform. So without further ado, I'd like you to, I'm going to turn it over to Keith Taylor and let him tell you about the Coast Guard. I'm sure you will be very impressed with the breadth and of responsibilities that he has, that the Coast Guard mission has, and especially, I know I've seen this before, you're going to be impressed by, you know, the quality of the Coast Guardsmen that work for him.
Good morning, everyone. I guess good afternoon at this point. What I'm going to do is spend about 10 minutes to 15 minutes. Jana, keep me on track back there, please. Give you a little bit of overview of a few things, and I want to open it up for questions. I'm here to take the heat, I guess, as good Mark Rich shared with you. And I want to thank those that gave us a little bit of tribute to begin with for Memorial Day. Very moving, very important, and this is a time of deep reflection for all of us who serve, and I ask for all of you to remember those that are still out there today defending our nation around the globe, because they're giving everything they have. And remember their families who are back here standing the watch as well, because they go through a lot when people are forward deployed. And I know you all care very deeply about those people, and I thank you for that. It's great to be here with Seattle Rotary. Seattle is a great city, and this is a great Rotary. So I'm always happy to have a chance to come as a guest. Lots of close friends out here today. I've been in Seattle for about 2 years, and that'll be a capstone for a little bit of my discussion. But let me start out. There was a lot of this Huskies stuff and Cougars stuff. So without my resume, I'm going to say go Bears, go Boilermakers, and go Engineers. So at the end, if somebody can tell me the 3 schools, I'll give you a little prize, okay? So you've got that, and Tom, you're disqualified, okay? Without a doubt. So I guess my topic is Homeland Security and economic trade. And I'm actually not going to talk about that directly. But you'll get it at the end of the dialogue that I have with you, because it's so critically important. I said I've been out here for 2 years, coming to Seattle, very excited. This is the epicenter of maritime stuff. I'm going to have an opportunity to make a huge difference, and we've got great young men and women that are serving our nation every day out here. And it didn't take me too long, and please think about this, to figure out that you don't have to move too far away from this great waterfront right in front of us here to really get the fact that very few people understand how important that water is to all of them. Our economic vitality, our security, our cultural underpinning. And that's something that Mark and the Marine Corps and the Merchant Marine and the United States Coast Guard, as your sea services, stand and defend in our own way each and every day and work very closely together. So I'd like you to climb with me to the top of the Space Needle. Put that in your mind, iconic symbol of Seattle. And I'm going to start to the north, Elliott Bay Marina. I think everybody got that picture? Elliott Bay Marina. Wonderful recreational boating marina up there. In the states of Washington and Oregon, we have over 400,000 recreational boats. And your Coast Guard has the responsibility, working with the states, to try to make sure that those people that go out for fun do so safely. How many of you in here have boats? Okay, next time you go out, remember this. Put your life jacket on. And that gets a laugh, but I've flown almost 5,000 hours in Coast Guard helicopters. I've been out in some horrific weather, and I've pulled some people out of the water that haven't made it. And I've had to tell their families. Either we couldn't find them, or we got there too late. And that's hard to do, and very, very painful. I'll tell you, after doing what I've done for 30 years, life jackets save lives. Tell your neighbors, tell your friends, tell the people that come on your boat for fun where they are. And if you ever have the smallest of problem, put your life jacket on first, then figure out what the problem is. Our water here is unforgiving, and a life jacket will save your life. So now that we've left that fun spot called the marina, we're going to move to 9091. And we are the home of the Alaska fleet here. In the Pacific Northwest, we have almost 7,000 commercial fishing vessels that ply our coasts and our inland waters, as well as go to Alaska. And they have for many, many years. That is important. It's part of our heritage here, and we have to make sure that that remains vibrant and strong. Now, for part of the season, which we're in right now, 90, 91, and then down to 66, become home to cruise ships on many of our days. Over 200 calls last year, 850,000 people came in and out of Seattle. Those of you in the hospitality business, that's significant. Came in and out of Seattle to join or leave one of those cruises. That's a big market. It's growing. And Seattle pioneered the gateway to Alaska, which is so critically important to the United States. So let's move a little bit further to the south. And we have high-speed ferries, clipper ferries, that have been running for over 20 years internationally here. Really a place setter in the world for that type of service, and they're still at it today. Move back towards the center of the waterfront, and it's been typically what we see a lot around the country here, is gentrified in many ways. We have big wheels, we have aquariums, we have restaurants, we have shops, we have tourist attractions. That's okay. They mix with the industrial activities. I missed one. Let's go back to the north for a minute. Grain elevators. Who would imagine today, in a place like Seattle, we still have active grain elevators? And if you combine Seattle, Tacoma, you combine the terminals in the Columbia River Basin, Pacific Northwest is the second largest export point for grain in our nation, second only to the Mississippi River system. It's significant, it's big business, and it's amazing that it still happens here in Seattle along the waterfront. Going back to the south, Washington State Ferries at Coleman Dock. Aside from Mark's statement about what we're doing with certification and manning standards on those ferries, which is critically important, more than happy to answer any questions you may have about that. The largest ferry system in the United States, the third largest ferry system in the world, They carry more vehicles than any other ferry system in the world. It's big, it's complex, and it's so important to our economy and our culture here. Right next door, counties are running high-speed ferries to the out islands. Then you get into our container port. Container port, if you combine Seattle and Tacoma, I won't get into the competition part of that, but if you combine the two of them, third largest container facility in the nation, second only to LALB. If you've been down to Los Angeles lately, you know how big that is. And then Newark over in New Jersey. It is significant, and very few of those boxes are destined for the Pacific Northwest or leave the Pacific Northwest. They hit the rail system, they're going to Chicago, they're going to Cleveland, they're going all the way to the East Coast. Very, very significant. Then you get to our facility at Pier 36. Those of you may know it as you drive by. There's 3 big red boats there. Those represent our nation's only icebreakers. They're our ability to project sovereignty into the polar reaches. They're our ability to bring scientists to places that they can get to in no other way. And right now we only have 2 of them that are operational. And I'll be more than happy to talk more about icebreakers when I conclude if anybody has questions. You go around to Harbor Island. We have oil terminal. And then you have Vigor Shipyard that's actually building ships, which is somewhat of a rarity in the United States this day and age. And they do a lot of repair work, and they're very, very significant. I just talked about what's right outside our door. 20 billion gallons of oil move in or out of the Puget Sound every year. And we as a Coast Guard have a role in that. And we're very, very serious about what we do in that area. Lots of things going on, lots of challenges. So if we were to do a standard SWOT analysis, and I won't get into strengths and weaknesses, but I'll look at opportunities and threats to us as a region as we look at the future. First off, we're a tough area to operate out here. Our weather is really bad for a lot of time of the year. And those of you that have been to the outer coast know that those areas where the rivers spill out to that tremendous Pacific Ocean get exceptionally dangerous with what we call breaking bars, as that big surf lumps up against the outflow of the rivers. We have fog. We have low visibility. We have an incredibly amount of complex traffic in the Puget Sound, the Straits of Juan de Fuca, and up into the Straits of Georgia. We have a lot of things that are going east-west across that, and we have a lot of things that are going north-south. We operate the Cooperative Vessel Traffic Service here. Us, in concert with the Canadian Coast Guard, we handle over 280,000 transits a year in our water, managing and controlling big vessels, making sure that they move safely in and out of our ports. We have a lot of foreign vessels that call on our ports, and the U.S. Coast Guard is involved with them. Last year we did over 8,000 port state control visits. Foreign vessel calling on a port in the Pacific Northwest. We may board them well offshore if they represent some heightened risk to our safety, our security, or our environmental protection. We may meet them when the pilots meet them at the pilot station. We may ride them in and inspect them. We may join with our partners in Customs and Border Protection and meet them at the dock to make sure that they meet all of the international standards as well as the U.S. standards. If it's a U.S. vessel, I talked about Vigor building ships. They're building the next class of Washington State ferries. The United States Coast Guard approves those plans. I have inspectors that go to the shipyard regularly to inspect the build. When those ships are done and put in the water and they go on their first sea trials, there will be Coast Guard experts with them to ensure the ship operates for its intended purposes, and we will give it a certificate of inspection that allows it to operate. We're very busy in that area as well. The other challenges we have here in our SWOT analysis, there's smuggling going on. We have 125 miles of maritime boundary with us and the Canadians. Things are moving north, things are moving south. Money, drugs, undocumented aliens. We want to make sure we do everything we can. And part of my job is to work very closely with those Canadians. I touch almost every segment of the Canadian government in my job. Canadian Forces, the Canadian Coast Guard, Transport Canada, Environment Canada, and the RCMP, just to name a few. Very important and a significant part of our business. And finally, while some will debate this next statement, we still have very pristine waters here. And we need to do everything we can to protect that. And we work very closely with a lot of the tribal nations on treaty rights, the protection of fisheries, and making sure that all of the environmental standards are upheld. As you look to the future, what's going on? We are the gateway of the Pacific. We should never lose sight of that. This is the age of the Pacific, and it's also the age of the Arctic. We're the jumping off point. We've been the jumping off point for the large commercial fishing fleet that's gone to the Bering each year. We are poised to be the jumping off point for all the other things that are likely to happen in the Arctic. Whether it's drilling, whether it's ecotourism, whether it's additional fisheries that may take place. And those are all going to take Coast Guard activity here as well as up in the Arctic. Energy, energy, and more energy. I go nowhere when somebody doesn't sit me down or talk to me about what their port is going to do. LNG export now is very big discussion. The LNG conversion of Washington State ferries and other ships, a very big deal. Coal, where, when, how, I don't know, but possibly. We're talking about oil. Those of you that have followed the press in British Columbia, will there be a new pipeline to Kitimat? Will Vancouver expand? And will that oil flow out through the Straits of Juan de Fuca and have our involvement? Very, very significant. And renewable energy sources. We're very involved in permitting and review of offshore wind as well as offshore wave generation. Both of those are happening, and they're happening now. The Panama Canal, as that expansion completes and it opens up, is that going to change the flow of goods and what happens here in the Pacific Northwest? Hard to say, but we must watch it very closely. And finally, there are a host of statutory regulatory changes that we're very involved in. Towing vessels, commercial fishing vessels, environmental emissions standards that are all affecting the maritime industry. That list of things I just arrayed are big, they're complex, and your Coast Guard is involved in all of them. Finally, I want to give a quick shout out to all of the men and women that serve under my command. First off, we've got a great group of people that are out there trying to prevent bad things from happening. They're inspecting those vessels. They're working on those regulatory frameworks. One thing I always tell people, and some of you in this room are part of the maritime industry, my job is to listen very carefully to the industry. I do not just establish regulatory standards without understanding the economics behind them, understanding what it really means to comply with those standards. Because we've got to make sure that we protect things here, but that we also maintain our competitiveness as a nation and as a region, because it's absolutely critical. We've got other folks that are going aboard those vessels and climbing into the bilges to make sure that the environmental standards are all met. And then I have a wonderful group of frontline operators that are responding and protecting things. They're driving patrol boats. They're driving those 47-foot motor light boats across those very dangerous bars, 20, 30-foot seas. They're going out. I've got a group of great helicopter pilots out here that are doing tremendous things, and we are the jumping off point for some of our largest ships in the Coast Guard here at Pier 36. So your Coast Guard is on watch, and they're doing a great job. These are tough times. We're all facing the challenges of the Budget Control Act. We're trying to balance what we fund today to make sure we're ready to meet the call that will come tonight. Many of you may have seen the press this week, just yesterday, day before. We had a 300-plus foot fish catcher processor with an uncontrolled engine room fire off of Grays Harbor. We had to launch a number of our boats, our aircraft, get cutters underway. Fortunately, they were able to control the fire. They had 130 people on board. They got all non-essential crew off under our supervision. We organized to get a tug out there. They're safely into Aberdeen now. Those things happen because your Coast Guard is on watch each and every day. We've got great folks. If you ever run into any of my young folks, please say thank you for me. It's always important that they hear that. They do a great job. With that, I'd like to stop, and I'll open up to questions that anybody may have. So the question is, if you look in the discussion of a bomb in one of these containers, are we lucky or am I really good? Let me answer it in this way. That's a very complex question. And the ability to screen everything is really not something that is economically feasible or practical. So first and foremost, we rely very heavily on good intelligence and good information. And you'll excuse me if I don't get into too many of those details because much of those are eyes-only type of information that we deal with. We work very closely with lots of other partners around the globe to get that. Second is looking at patterns. It's looking at shipping. As I said, there may be something that gets our interest, and we may send a team of experts far offshore to touch a ship that's bound for the United States before it gets anywhere near our ports, to do surveillance, to do check. Then we're going to look when they get closer ashore. We'll ride in. We have teams between us, some actually Department of Defense experts that join with us, as well as Customs and Border Protection that do good surveillance. One of our challenges, we just saw this in Boston not too long ago, folks, is we are an open society. That's our cultural underpinning. And we're always trying to balance that openness with security. And we're working very hard on that problem. I would like to think that we're really good, but like many things in life, there's always going to be some element of luck.
Thank you very much. How large is your budget?
How large is our budget? Let me talk about the Coast Guard overall. And I actually had the opportunity prior to coming out here to be the chief financial officer for the Coast Guard for 3 years. So we're about a $10 billion annual enterprise. About $10 billion. About $1.5 billion of that goes to pay retirees, so we can't really stop paying them. So you take that off the top. We used to have about $1.5 billion of that would go to major acquisition, building new ships, buying new aircraft, getting new boats, fixing our piers and our infrastructure. And about $6.5 billion was our annual operating money, fuel, salaries and pay, health care, maintenance, all of those types of things. Under sequester, we have taken a very significant reduction in a very short period of time. So we've had to make some very difficult trade-offs that I'm making out here right now. We're operating less than we did last year. I've got less aircraft in the air. I've got less cutters underway. We're trying to make sure that we can meet the most urgent of need. We can respond when somebody calls Mayday. I'm ready to go if we ever have a pollution event. I'm trying to retain those types of things in the short term. Over the long term, our challenge is going to be balancing what you need to do today to meet mission, to get out there and get the job done, to buy down the risk that is inherent in the maritime environment we have. And hopefully I convinced you all that the maritime is very important. But we also need to buy the next Coast Guard of the future. I'll close with Pier 36, Paul. I talked about our facility down there. Coast Guard cutter Healy, some of you remember, she's the one that broke out Nome about 1.5 years ago. She's 15 years old now. She's our youngest major ship there. The next two, Polar Sea and Polar Star, are 42 and 43 years old. Coast Guard cutter Midget is home ported here, and we're proud to say that she is the youngest of our high endurance fleet, our 378-foot ships. She's 46 years old now. And we have Coast Guard men and women sailing on those ships, doing the work our nation needs them to do. And we need to buy, build, and get them the equipment that will serve them for the next 50 or 60 years like these platforms have for the last. I want to thank Rotary. You folks are great, and I appreciate all of your support.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.